Hello my friend. I'm sure you all already know me, because I'm sure you've seen the shooting process from my video entitled, Social Experiments in Grove Valley. And yes, I am Mr. Akon. And actually this is not my real name, it's just my cool name, almost like 69 in Juice WRLD. Actually my real name is Ray, I'm 29 years old, and now I live in a big city called Grove City. I chose the name Mr. Akon because my favorite animal is a cat, and I chose the name when I became a successful YouTuber, who has now become one of the actors in the famous action films around the world. I'm sure many of you don't know that I used to live in a big village called Grove Valley, even though I wasn't born there. And I'm sure you know me as a famous person and also rich, who can buy a variety of foods and expensive stuff that I want. However, being famous is not always as exciting as people think, because I've felt it all. I'm saying this because I'm the type who can be said to always follow the words and desires of others without thinking carefully. And I say all this because everything I do when I'm outside the public will always be highlighted by the camera of the paparazzi, and that is very disturbing. Also, everything I do will always be a topic of discussion on every social media, and in the real world. Whether it's wrong or right, which is always exaggerated by online media. Another example, which makes me unhappy when I become a famous person, is when I share the goodness with others, by giving money quietly, without anyone knowing it. And they always insult me, by commenting on each of my Instagram posts. They call me a stingy person. In fact, they just don't know what I actually did. And vice versa. When I started to follow their words, I try to share the goodness with others, by recording it, and uploading the video to my YouTube channel. This time, I think that it can inspire people, so they can also share kindness with others. But still, some of them even call me a person who wants to be praised for everything I have done. In fact, none of their words were true. Because, as I said before, I am the type who can be said, always follows the words and desires of others. I don't know, it's a mental illness, or a disorder in me. But, it all reminds me of my past memories, when I was a child, with my father, in a small village called Live Valley. Live Valley, in the past was the village where we lived, as well as the place where I was born. There, we live in a small house. And the house was made by my father, with the trees he took from the forest. Also the forest is not far from our house. The valley is a small village. Most of the population works as farmers. Meanwhile, my father fared less fortunate there, because he did not have a permanent job like everyone else, and only works when someone needs his help to do something. But unfortunately, the village is known as its village people who are rude, and always think negatively towards others. In that village, my father and I were always insulted and humiliated because of our poor condition, also because of the physical differences that existed in me. The difference is, there is only me, a child who has white hair and blue eyes. And that makes me have no friends there, because their parents are afraid to let their child play with me, because they think that I have a contagious disease. Because of that, most people there always insulted, and forced my father to immediately leave the village. And from that moment on, my father thought about leaving Live Valley, and going to the village called Grow Valley, even though it was quite far from our village. My father chose to go there because the villagers there are known for their kindness and care for others. Even though we don't know what will happen to us as poor people when we are in such a large and wide village. A few days later, after my father sold our little house at a cheap price, and the rest of one of our treasures, that is, an old horse that has a very thin body. That is because we are not able to feed him regularly, because we do not have much money to feed the horse. After that, my father and I left the village, without any of us riding the horse, because of the condition of our horse that was starving and exhausted. A few moments later, we met a man in the middle of our way, and the man tried to approach us. He approached us, only to insult and scold my father with harsh words. The man did that because he considered my father a fool, because he saw we had horses, but no one of us rode the horse. My father could only be silent over the words of the man, while sad. After the man went away, then my father told me to ride the horse, and immediately continued our way. After that, we meet a woman in the middle of our next way, and the woman tried to approach us. She approached us, and again, only to insult and scold my father, also to denounce me with harsh words. The woman did that because she considered my father as an unlucky person. She said that my father had a wife who had given birth to a child, which she considered to be an ungodly child, because she saw only myself riding the horse. And again, my father could only be silent over the words of the woman, while sad. And after the woman went away, then my father apologized to me, and told myself to get off the horse, and said that only my father will ride the horse. Before rode the horse, my father tried to tie a bag that he carried using a rope. And my father held the rope while riding a horse. My father did this to ease the burden carried by our horses, because my father realized that the horse cannot be ridden by more than one person. And on the next way, we met an old man dressed neatly and politely, and he tried to approach us. At first, we thought that he was a good person. But, again and again, he approached us only to insult and scold my father with harsh words, while showing off his wealth. The old man did that because he considered my father to be poor, and also bad, for letting his child walk, and only my father rode the horse. And my father can only be silent on the words of the old man, while sad, and looks a little angry. And after the old man went away, then, my father told me to ride the horse with him. My father was forced to do this, so that no one insulted us again in the next way. Even though my father knows, there will definitely be people who will insult us again. But at least my father had a reason why we rode the old horse together. Then, we continued our journey to Grove Valley. And not far from there, we met a man who looked suspicious who was trying to approach us. And that made my father look a little afraid of the man, and tried to stay away from him. But, the man approached immediately, and asked us. The man asked, where were we going, and why were we both riding an old and thin horse together? The man asked using kind and polite words. That made my father surprised and unexpected. Because, meeting someone who looks suspicious, but having a good and polite attitude. Then my father said, if we were going to Grove Valley, and explained everything that had happened before, why we were riding our old horse together. And the man was surprised, then smiled at my father. He said, when we arrived at the village called Grove Valley, and he welcomed us. Then, the man told my father to follow him to a place. In the middle of the way, we met everyone who always smiled at us, and that made me and my father feel very happy. After following the man, unexpectedly, he showed us a nice house, and offered us to live there for free, and the man also gave a job to my father to take care of the man's garden, a place not far from the house. Then my father was very happy to accept it, and thanked the man. And my father apologized because at first my father tried to stay away from the man, for fear of the man's clothes that looked suspicious, and also afraid of the knife the man was carrying. The man also forgave my father, and explained why he wore a mask containing traces of blood, and carried a knife near the forest. That's because, the man had just slaughtered a cow in the man's cage near the forest. Then my father was a little surprised and felt ashamed of what he had done. And the man also gave my father advice about life lessons, so that my father would always be himself, and not be influenced to follow the words and desires of others. And the man also advised my father not to make conclusions about other people just by looking at his appearance. My father gladly accepted the man's advice, and apologized a second time. And the next day, my father asked someone else. My father asked who this kind man was, and why he told us to stay in the house for free, and also giving work to my father so easily. Then the person replied that the man was a good person and also the richest person in Grove Valley, and the person said that the man always wore simple clothes, because he did not want to show his wealth to others. Hearing that person's words made my father surprised and also very happy, feeling very fortunate to have met that man. That's where my father and I could live happily, and full of joy, with lots of good people, and also friendly. And there, I began to be known by many people, because of the uniqueness that exists in me. So, when I grew up, I thought of making use of my uniqueness, by starting my career as a YouTuber, which finally made me a famous actor, and lived in a big city called Grow City, like now. And, whenever I remember all the stories about what my father and I used to feel, it can make me fight my sadness, when I was always insulted, and humiliated by many people. Because, everything we do, whether it's wrong or right, there will definitely be people who don't like us. End.
We know how you feel when you are always insulted by many people, and we know how it feels to be insulted for the mistakes made by other people.